I found the photograph at an antique shop in Providence, Rhode Island. It was a Saturday in October, one of those perfect New England autumn days when the leaves are brilliant crimson and gold, and the air carries the scent of wood smoke and approaching winter. The shop was tucked into a narrow building on Benefit Street, specializing in Victorian-era photographs and memorabilia. Among the collections was a large photograph, perhaps 14 by 18 inches, showing a formal family portrait from the 1870s. The photograph showed 9 people arranged in 3 rows. The father, seated on the far right, appeared to be in his early 40s, wearing a dark suit and bow tie, while the mother, seated at the center, looked to be in her late 40s, dressed in a dark gown with lace trim. Behind them stood their older children, a son around 20, and 2 daughters about 16 and 14. In the front row were 4 more children. On the left side was a girl around 19, then a boy around 10, a girl about 7, and the youngest child, a boy about 3, seated on his mother's lap. All maintained serious expressions, their formal clothing and composed posture reflecting the dignified style of family portraiture from the era. But there was something unsettling about the photograph. All 7 children were staring in the same direction, not at the camera, but at something to the left of the frame. Their eyes were fixed on the same spot, with an intensity that seemed inappropriate for a formal portrait. Even the 3-year-old on his mother's lap was gazing that direction with an expression that seemed almost frightened. The parents, by contrast, looked directly at the camera, as subjects should. The shop owner noticed my interest. "That's the Witmore family from Portsmouth," he said quietly. "Taken in 1873. That photograph has a strange story attached to it. Several people who've examined it closely claim there's something wrong with it, something about what the children are looking at." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Look closely at where they're staring. Some people claim you can see faint figures in that direction, figures that shouldn't be there. And according to local records, the children all insisted they were looking at their grandparents during the sitting. Their dead grandparents, who had died months before. On the back of the photograph, in faded ink, was written, "The Witmore family, Portsmouth, Rhode Island, August 1873. The children see what we cannot." And below that, in different, more recent handwriting, all 7 children claimed they saw their dead grandparents standing beside the photographer. The photographer saw nothing. Look closely at where they're staring. I bought the photograph along with a folder of materials, letters, newspaper clippings, and testimony from family members for $400, intrigued by the mystery. That evening in my hotel room, I examined the photograph under a magnifying glass. In the left edge of the frame, in the area where all 7 children were staring, there was a strange quality to the image. The exposure seemed slightly different, as if something had been there creating a shadow or disturbance in the light. And when I looked very closely, I could almost make out shapes, vague, translucent forms that might have been 2 figures standing together, or it might have been nothing, a trick of light and grain and my imagination. But the children's expressions were undeniable. They were all looking at something, all focused on the same spot, all with expressions ranging from wonder to fear. I began reading through the materials. What emerged was one of the strangest stories I'd encountered in my years of researching historical photographs. The first documents were letters written by members of the Witmore family in the weeks after the photograph was taken. From a letter by Sarah Witmore, age 19, September 1873. Dear Aunt Margaret, I write to tell you of the strangest occurrence during our family portrait sitting last month. Father had arranged for Mr. Thompson, the photographer from Providence, to come to our home to make a portrait of our entire family. It was to be a formal sitting, and we all dressed in our finest clothes. The sitting took place in our parlor. Mr. Thompson set up his equipment, positioned us carefully, and prepared to make the exposure. He instructed us to remain perfectly still and to look directly at the camera. But as soon as he began the exposure, I saw them. Standing just to the left of Mr. Thompson's camera, watching us with gentle expressions, grandmother and grandfather Witmore. They appeared exactly as I remembered them from before their deaths last winter. Grandmother in her grey silk dress with the cameo brooch. Grandfather in his dark suit with the watch chain. They looked solid and real, not ghostly or transparent. They were simply there, watching us have our portrait made. I was so startled that I turned to look at them instead of at the camera. And I noticed all my siblings doing the same. Every one of us, from little Robert on Mother's lap to James standing in the back, was staring at grandmother and grandfather. Mother and father seemed to see nothing unusual. They looked directly at the camera as instructed. But all 7 of us children were staring at our dead grandparents. The exposure lasted perhaps 30 seconds. During that entire time, grandmother and grandfather stood there, watching us. Grandmother was smiling slightly. Grandfather had tears in his eyes. They looked so real, so present. I wanted to speak to them, to ask why they were there, but I was too frightened to break the stillness of the portrait sitting. When the exposure ended and Mr. Thompson emerged from beneath his cloth, grandmother and grandfather vanished. They were simply gone, as if they had never been there. I immediately asked my siblings if they had seen what I saw. Every one of them confirmed it. All 7 of us had seen grandmother and grandfather standing beside the photographer, watching us. When we told mother and father, they were skeptical. They said we must have imagined it, that we were missing our grandparents and had perhaps experienced a collective delusion. Mr. Thompson certainly saw nothing unusual. He was quite puzzled by our excitement and our questions. But I know what I saw. It was not imagination. Grandmother and grandfather were there. All 7 of us children saw them clearly. And when the photograph was developed and sent to us, I noticed that all of us are looking in the same direction, the direction where they stood. I do not know what to make of this. Why would all 7 children see them while the adults saw nothing? Why would they appear during our portrait sitting? What does it mean? I am both comforted and unsettled by the experience. Comforted that perhaps our grandparents are still watching over us in some way. Unsettled by the strangeness of it all. Your confused niece, Sarah, from a letter by James Witmore, age 20, September 1873. Father, I know you and Mother believe we children experienced some sort of shared delusion during the portrait sitting. But I must tell you, as the eldest, that what we saw was real. I am 20 years old. I am not given to flights of fancy or imagination. I do not believe in ghost stories or spiritualist nonsense. But I know what I saw. During the exposure, grandfather and grandmother were standing just to the left of the photographer. They were as solid and real as you and Mother. They wore the clothes I remembered from their final months. Grandfather's dark suit, grandmother's grey dress. They were watching us with expressions of love and perhaps sadness. All 7 of us children saw them. We have compared our experiences in detail. We all saw the same things, the same clothes, the same expressions, the same position. This was not a case of suggestible children influencing each other. We all saw them independently and simultaneously. The fact that you and Mother and Mr. Thompson saw nothing does not mean they were not there. Perhaps there is something about children, or perhaps about those who knew them in life, that allows us to perceive things adults cannot. I have been reading about psychical phenomena. There are documented cases of apparitions appearing to some people, but not others, of children being particularly sensitive to such manifestations. What we experienced may fit within these documented patterns. I do not claim to understand what happened, but I know it happened, and I believe the photograph itself may contain evidence, if examined closely. Look at where all 7 of us are staring. We are all focused on the exact same spot, the spot where they stood. Your son, James the Fund, found testimony from the photographer himself, written in response to inquiries from the Witmore family. From a letter by Edward Thompson, photographer, October 1873. Dear Mr. Witmore, in response to your inquiry about the portrait sitting conducted at your home in August, I can state with certainty that I observed no unusual phenomena during the exposure. I saw no additional figures in the room beyond your family members. I experienced no sense of presence or disturbance. The exposure proceeded normally in all respects that I could observe. However, I must note 2 unusual aspects of the sitting. First, all 7 of your children turned their gaze away from the camera during the exposure, all looking in the same direction, toward a spot to the left of my camera. This was quite unusual, as I had specifically instructed everyone to look directly at the lens. Most subjects comply with such instructions, but in this case, all 7 children seemed compelled to look elsewhere. Second, when I developed the plate, I noticed an unusual quality to the left side of the image. There appears to be a subtle disturbance in the exposure in that area, a slight fogging or shadowing that I cannot account for through any technical explanation. It is as if something was present that affected the light, though I saw nothing at the time. I have been a photographer for 20 years. I have made thousands of portraits. I have never experienced anything quite like this sitting. While I cannot confirm that any supernatural occurrence took place, I also cannot fully explain the children's behavior or the anomaly in the developed image. I remain skeptical of spiritualist claims, but I must acknowledge there are aspects of this portrait that I find puzzling. Respectfully, Edward Thompson, I found accounts from neighbors and family friends who had examined the photograph and heard the children's testimony. From the diary of Reverend Samuel Pierce, September 1873, I visited the Witmore family today at their request. They wished to discuss the unusual circumstances surrounding their recent family portrait. All 7 Witmore children, ranging in age from 3 to 20, maintain that they saw the spirits of their late grandparents during the portrait sitting. They described the apparitions in consistent detail. They all saw the same figures, wearing the same clothing, in the same location, for the same duration. I examined each child separately to ensure they had not influenced each other's accounts. Their testimonies remained consistent. Even young Robert, who is only 3 years old, insisted he saw grandmother and grandfather during the portrait. I then examined the photograph itself. It is indeed unusual. All 7 children are looking away from the camera, all focused on the same spot to the left of the frame. In that area, there appears to be a faint anomaly, a shadowing or disturbance that might, with imagination, be interpreted as suggesting forms. I am a man of faith and a man of reason. I believe in the eternal soul, but I am cautious about claims of apparitions and supernatural manifestations. However, I find the consistency of the children's testimony compelling. 7 children, including a young adult and a toddler, all describing the same experience in the same detail, is difficult to dismiss as simple imagination. The scriptures speak of children and innocence being able to perceive spiritual truths that adults cannot. Perhaps there is something to this. Perhaps the children, in their innocence and in their close connection to their recently deceased grandparents, were able to perceive a spiritual presence that the adults could not see. I advised the family to regard the experience as a blessing, a final farewell from beloved grandparents, a reassurance that they watch over their descendants from beyond the veil. Whether one accepts the supernatural explanation or seeks a rational one, the photograph remains a remarkable document. It captures a moment when 7 children claim to have seen beyond the mortal world. From a letter by Dr. William Morrison, family physician, October 1873. I have known the Witmore children all their lives. They are healthy, intelligent, and generally sensible children. They are not prone to hysteria or flights of fancy. When I heard of their claims regarding the portrait sitting, I examined each child for signs of illness or mental disturbance that might account for a shared delusion. I found nothing. All 7 children are in good physical and mental health. The consistency of their testimony is remarkable. They all describe seeing their grandparents in precise, matching detail. They all report the same clothing, the same expressions, the same duration of the apparition. From a medical perspective, I can offer no explanation for a shared visual hallucination among 7 individuals ranging from age 3 to age 20. Such a phenomenon would be unprecedented in my experience. I am forced to consider that the children may have genuinely perceived something that the adults present could not perceive. Whether this was a psychological phenomenon related to grief and memory, or whether it was truly a paranormal occurrence, I cannot determine. The photograph itself is certainly unusual, with all 7 children looking away from the camera in the same direction, as if transfixed by something beyond the frame. I found testimony from the Witmore parents, who remained skeptical, but were troubled by their children's unwavering insistence. From the journal of Catherine Witmore, the mother, September 1873. I do not know what to make of what my children claim to have seen during our portrait sitting. My husband and I saw nothing unusual. Mr. Thompson, the photographer, saw nothing. Yet all 7 of our children insist they saw my late in-laws standing beside the camera during the exposure. They describe Mother and Father Witmore in perfect detail, the clothing they often wore, their expressions, their posture. They all tell the same story without variation. Even little Robert, who is only 3, keeps asking when grandmother and grandfather will visit again. I want to believe they simply imagined it, that grief over losing their grandparents created a shared fantasy. But the consistency of their testimony troubles me. And when I look at the photograph, seeing all 7 of them staring in the same direction, with such intensity? I feel uncertain. Perhaps there are things children can perceive that adults cannot. Perhaps innocence allows them to see beyond the veil that separates this world from whatever comes next. Or perhaps they wanted so badly to see their grandparents one more time that their minds created the vision they longed for. I keep the photograph in our parlor, but I find it unsettling. When I look at it, I remember that moment when all the children suddenly turned their heads, all focused on the same spot, all with expressions of wonder and fear. I remember how they remained transfixed throughout the exposure, ignoring Mr. Thompson's instructions to look at the camera. They saw something. All 7 of them saw something. Whether it was truly the spirits of their grandparents or something else, I may never know. I found records of paranormal investigators who examined the photograph in later years. From the files of the Society for Psychical Research, 1895, the Witmore family portrait of 1873 has been brought to our attention as a possible case of collective apparitional experience documented photographically. The case presents several interesting features. 7 children, ranging from age 3 to age 20 at the time, all report seeing the apparitions of their deceased grandparents during the portrait sitting. The grandparents had died approximately 8 months before the photograph was taken. The children's testimonies, recorded separately shortly after the event, show remarkable consistency. All describe the grandparents as appearing solid and real, wearing specific clothing the family recognizes, standing in a specific location, and remaining visible for the duration of the exposure, approximately 30 seconds. The adults present, the parents and the photographer, saw nothing unusual. Examination of the photograph itself reveals that all 7 children are indeed looking away from the camera, all focused on the same spot to the left of the frame. In that area, careful examination reveals what appears to be a subtle anomaly in the exposure, a fogging or shadowing that might suggest forms, though interpretation is subjective. This case fits a pattern we've observed in other apparitional experiences, where children are more likely to report seeing apparitions than adults, and where multiple witnesses sometimes report seeing the same manifestation, while others present perceive nothing. Possible explanations include collective hallucination induced by grief and suggestion, optical illusion misinterpreted by the children, or genuine paranormal phenomenon. We cannot definitively determine which explanation is correct based on available evidence. The photograph remains a remarkable document, whatever the underlying explanation may be. I found accounts from people who had examined the photograph closely in later years and reported strange experiences. From a letter by Margaret Sullivan, granddaughter of Sarah Witmore, 1920. I inherited the family portrait from my mother, who was Sarah Witmore before her marriage. The photograph has always fascinated me because of the story attached to it, that all 7 children saw their dead grandparents during the sitting. I have spent many hours examining the photograph, and I must confess that when I look very carefully at the area where the children are all staring, I sometimes think I can see faint forms. 2 figures, indistinct and shadowy, but suggesting the outlines of a man and woman standing side by side. It may be nothing more than grain and light, creating patterns my mind wants to interpret as figures. Or it may be that something was captured on that plate in 1873, something the photographer could not see, but which affected the exposure nonetheless. What I find most remarkable is the expressions on the children's faces. They are not simply looking in that direction casually. They are transfixed, absorbed, almost frightened. All 7 of them, from the 20-year-old young man standing in back to the 3-year-old child on his mother's lap, show the same intense focus. Whatever they saw, whether truly the spirits of their grandparents or something else, they all saw the same thing at the same time. That much is undeniable from the photograph itself. From a letter by Dr. Harold Chen, photography historian, 1968. I have examined the Witmore family portrait of 1873 as part of my research into anomalous Victorian photographs. The image is indeed unusual. Modern photographic analysis reveals an exposure anomaly in the left portion of the frame, the area where all 7 children are staring. This anomaly cannot be easily explained by standard photographic errors or artifacts. It appears as if something was present that affected the light, creating a subtle fogging or shadowing. Whether this represents a technical flaw in the exposure, environmental conditions during the sitting, or something more unusual, is difficult to determine with certainty after nearly a century. What is indisputable is the behavior documented in the photograph. 7 children, all looking in the same direction, all with expressions suggesting they are seeing something remarkable or frightening. The youngest child, barely more than a toddler, shows the same intense focus as his older siblings. The testimonies recorded at the time all consistently describe seeing the spirits of the children's deceased grandparents. This level of consistency in testimony from 7 witnesses, ranging from age 3 to age 20, is noteworthy, regardless of one's beliefs about the supernatural. The photograph stands as a remarkable historical document, either of a genuine paranormal experience captured on film, or of a fascinating psychological phenomenon where 7 individuals simultaneously experienced the same vision. I decided to conduct my own research, traveling to Portsmouth to examine records and speak with descendants of the Witmore family. I learned that all 7 children maintained throughout their lives that they had seen their grandparents during that portrait sitting. Even as they grew older and more skeptical of other supernatural claims, they never wavered in their insistence that they had seen their deceased grandparents that day. James Witmore, who lived until 1935, wrote in his memoirs, "I have spent my life as a rational man of science. I do not believe in spiritualism or superstition, but I know what I saw that day in 1873. My grandparents were there. All 7 of us children saw them clearly. Whatever explanation accounts for this experience, I cannot say. But I know it happened." Sarah Witmore, who died in 1943 at age 89, told her grandchildren, "People have always asked me if I really saw what I claimed to see, or if it was imagination. I can only tell you that it was as real as anything I have ever experienced. My grandmother and grandfather were standing beside that photographer, watching us with love. All of us children saw them. We saw them because we were meant to see them." Even Robert Witmore, who was only 3 years old during the sitting and would have no normal memory of the event, maintained as an adult that he remembered seeing his grandparents that day. "I have no other clear memories from that age," he wrote in a letter in 1925. "But I remember that moment. I remember grandmother and grandfather standing there watching us. It is one of my earliest and clearest memories. I spent weeks examining the photograph under various lighting conditions and with different photographic analysis techniques. And I must confess that when looked at carefully, there is something in that left portion of the frame. The anomaly is subtle, but it is there. In the area where all 7 children are staring, there appears to be a disturbance in the exposure that suggests forms, 2 forms, standing side by side, roughly the height of adults. It could be an artifact of the photographic process. It could be damage to the original plate. Or it could be evidence that something was there, something that affected the light even if the photographer and the parents could not see it with their eyes. I wrote a comprehensive account of the case, examining not just the photograph, but the remarkable consistency of the children's testimony over their entire lifetimes. The book was titled The Children Who Saw Beyond, The Witmore Portrait and the Boundary Between Worlds. The photograph from August 1873 appeared on the cover. Looking at it, knowing the story, it became one of the most haunting images I had ever encountered. 9 people posed formally in a Victorian parlor, the parents looking directly at the camera as they should, but all 7 children, every single one, looking away from the camera, all staring at the same spot to the left of the frame, all with expressions ranging from wonder to fear, all transfixed by something beyond the camera's view. In that area where they're all staring, if you look closely, there is a faint anomaly, a disturbance. Something that might be shadows, or grain, or artifacts of the photographic process, or something that might be 2 figures standing together, watching a family have their portrait made. The photograph was taken in August 1873, 8 months after the children's grandparents had died. According to all 7 children's testimony, those grandparents appeared during the sitting, visible only to the children, standing beside the photographer and watching the family with love and sadness. Whether one believes in spirits or apparitions or life after death, the photograph documents something remarkable. 7 children in a single moment, all seeing something that transfixed them, all turning away from the camera to stare at the same spot, all maintaining for the rest of their lives that they saw their dead grandparents. I received many letters in response to the book, some from paranormal researchers, others from skeptics offering rational explanations. But one letter moved me most deeply. It was from the great-great-granddaughter of James Witmore. Dear Dr. Morrison, thank you for researching and telling my family's strange story with such care and respect. James Witmore was my great-great-grandfather. I have heard the story of the portrait all my life, how he and all his siblings saw their deceased grandparents during the sitting, how they all looked away from the camera to stare at the spirits, how they maintained this story until their deaths. I have examined the photograph many times, and I must tell you, when I look at it carefully, I can see something in the area where they're all staring. It's faint, it's unclear, but there's something there. 2 forms that might be people standing together. I don't know if it's really my great-great-great-grandparents captured somehow on that photographic plate, or if it's just artifacts and shadows. But I know that 7 children saw something that day. 7 children who ranged from 3 to 20 years old, who had no reason to lie, and who never changed their story. Maybe children can see things adults cannot. Maybe grief and love can create bridges between this world and whatever comes next. Maybe death is not the end we think it is. Thank you for honoring my family's experience and for approaching it with both respect and serious investigation. Sincerely, Emily Witmore Chen. The photograph now hangs in my study, and I find myself drawn to it often. 9 people in 1873 posed for a family portrait, but only 2 of them looking at the camera as they should. The other 7 all staring in the same direction, all with expressions of wonder and fear, all seeing something that transfixed them. In the area where they're all looking, there is something. An anomaly, a disturbance, something that affects the light and the exposure in ways that cannot be easily explained. 7 children claimed they saw their dead grandparents standing there during the portrait. 7 children who maintained that claim until their own deaths decades later. 7 children who all described the same thing, in the same detail, at the same time. The photograph looked normal at first glance, just a formal Victorian family portrait. Until you noticed what all the children were staring at. Until you realized they were all looking away from the camera, all focused on something beyond the frame. Until you read their testimony about seeing the spirits of their deceased grandparents, and until you looked very closely at that area where they're all staring and saw the faint anomaly that might be nothing, or might be evidence that something was there after all. Something that 7 children could see, but the adults could not. Something that left a trace on the photographic plate, even if it was invisible to normal sight. This 1873 family portrait looked normal, until people noticed what all the children were staring at, and learned that they were seeing their dead grandparents standing beside the photographer, watching the family one last time from beyond death. A photograph that documents either a remarkable collective experience or a genuine crossing of the boundary between this world and the next. That's the eerie truth preserved in this image from August 1873. The photograph looked normal until people noticed what all the children were staring at.